For many societies across the galaxy, ritualistic duels or gladiatorial combat are commonplace. In some eyes, they are a way of settling debts or a question of honour, whilst for others they can be trials of leadership where only the strongest or smartest survive. Having said that, one society uses their gladiatorial spectacles for nothing short of sustenance, feeding off the pain and bloodshed unleashed in the arenas to keep themselves and those around them rejuvenated. These events are not just a means of survival, but also a vital tool against the ennui that almost perpetually plagues their race, and so the warriors involved with putting the shows together are both insanely skilled and dangerous fighters, as well as being able to play to a crowd. Though much of their work is done in their arenas, they can often be involved in the wars waged by their race, either striking alone or with the aid of other societal factions to devastating effect. Led by their Yinatak, the Brides of Death, they are the Hecatari, known more commonly as the Drukhari witch cults. This is Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. It is unknown exactly when the witch cults were founded, either under their current iteration or some other guise. I would wager that they were not something founded after the fall of the Eldari, though their role will definitely have shifted due to the consequences of that event. Instead, I think that the depraved and falling heart of the Eldari Empire had something of this nature within it. After all, excessive violence combined with artistic showmanship seems like something they would do, if you ask me. Whatever the circumstances of their origins, the witch cults have become as deeply embedded in Commoragh society as the Cabals, perhaps even more so as they've been around since before Vect seized control of the Dark City in M35 or so. Sadly, we do not know their evolution, but we do know why they came into being in the first place. Simply, a thirst for blood. The Drukhari are a bloodthirsty lot, and as we know, their souls are being drained by Slaanesh following the Eldari's fall. As a result, the Drukhari require a way to sustain and or rejuvenate their souls, and they have found that feeding off the pain and suffering of others has been a useful method of doing so. This is why the witch cults are of such import. By gathering in the Titanic arenas to witness the slaughters within, the crowds of Drukhari with enough affluence can take in a spectacular display of violence and pain that can energize all who witness it. And on top of that, with the horrific violence necessary to rejuvenate the crowd, comes a lot of bloodshed, as you'd expect, even enough to sate the thirsts and tendencies of the Drukhari, at least for a time. This is important due to one of the greatest, if less considered, threats to Commoragh, something that led to the fall of the Eldari itself in its own way: boredom. Before the fall, it was the ennui of the ancient Eldari that led them to seek the excesses and depravity that eventually birthed Slaanesh. It may not have been the sole reason, but it certainly will have contributed to things going sour. When you consider that the Drukhari are at least as, if not more, bloodthirsty than their predecessors in the Empire, and add in the fact that they need to feed on pain and whatnot to survive, you can start to imagine why boredom would become a disaster in Commoragh. There would be chaos and bloody murder in the streets and the spires, well, more than usual anyway, as the Drukhari tore each other and the city apart. By keeping the crowds not only well fed but also entertained, the witch cults provide two crucial services to the Dark City, and thus they are not groups that one challenges lightly. However, anyone who knows anything about the Drukhari is fully aware that they don't do things for the good of the city or for whatever else. They are self-serving and power-hungry almost universally. To this end, the cults will also use their shows as a way to display their prowess to the populace and to the cabals who run Commoragh, as well as flaunting their wealth with their arenas and their skills with the opponents they face. Unlike the Harlequins, who will visit Commoragh in their roving troops to perform shows that tell of historical events, the witch cults are based mainly within massive arena complexes as part of the Dark City. And these arenas are far beyond simple coliseums or racing tracks, no. They're incredibly diverse and complicated places that can do some mind-boggling things. No two arenas are quite the same, each with a unique set of features or hazards that help keep the events interesting, shall we say. The witches who enter the arena to perform will only be the best of the cult's members, able to put on the great displays that the crowd demands, but also more than capable against whatever they have to fight. If it's not duels between themselves, typically these adversaries will be prisoners of the cult or of the city in general. Disgraced nobility has found itself in the arena more than once, but some of the more prized catches are the more dangerous Xenos of the galaxy, such as orcs and especially space marines. By battling and defeating even these hardened warriors, the cult fulfills the second purpose of their shows: self-advertising. Many cabals and their archons will attend the shows put on by the witch cults. They're wealthy enough to afford any entry fees, so why bust up the sustenance and entertainment? Often a cult will receive patronage from one cabal or another to enhance the quality of the already insane performances to the benefit of both sides, but also to gain allies for when a real space raid is launched. Presumably due to the attrition of the arenas and the exactingly murderous nature of their training, the numbers within a witch cult are not that high. Probably more than a typical homunculus coven, but not as many as a cabal, and certainly not enough to perform most real space raids alone. As such, the witches act typically as mercenary allies to raiding cabals, acting as close assault troops and assuring the cult receives a fair share of slaves from the real space raids into the bargain. Those archons who have given patronage to the cult understandably can call upon this aid more regularly, but one must remember the fickle nature of the Drukhari. If the cults are drained by excessive raids, or the profit of slaves is deemed insufficient, it is more than likely that a rival archon could usurp this patronage and ensure that the original patron ends up dead, either by assassination or via the arena itself. That said, there are instances where the cult itself will lead and organise a real space raid, rather than relying on a cabal to lead the way. On these occasions, the other Drukhari who are able to afford it can tag along, either to watch a more immersive performance from the cult or to fight alongside them. It's far more dangerous, but also much more visceral, so the risk-reward balance is probably pretty favourable in their mind. The witch cults are structured quite regularly given the diversity within the Dark City, often revolving around a single individual with ancillary elements tacked on around the core of the witches. The leaders of the witch cults are individuals known as the Yinatak, more commonly referred to as the Succubi or the Archites. Typically, 3 of these exclusively female warriors lead the cult, though in truth there is one overall commander, whilst the other 2 just try to outdo one another. The Yinatak are the greatest of the witch cults, expert and heartless killers all who are seemingly unscarred throughout their undoubtedly long lives. They will have risen to their positions through skill of arms, becoming icons of the arenas and pretty much household names across Commoragh, such is their reputation. The Succubi presumably will enter the arena only from time to time as a special treat to the fans or as a way of relieving their own boredom, but much of their duty seems to be organisational in ensuring the arena runs smoothly and the slave supply keeps flowing. Of course, this includes the real space raids. Succubi will frequently join them for personal or political reasons, though if political manoeuvring is the order of the day, they will be far less subtle and far more violent than the archons who often give them patronage. Below the Archites are individuals known as Drakites, far more numerous than the Succubi below them, but much less trusted due to how they get the role. They lead warbands within the cult on raids where the Succubi are either busy or deem it unworthy of their time, but promotion to the rank comes from murdering the previous holder of said rank with the end goal of making it to the top of the chain. As a result, I very much doubt that a succubus takes any time for private meetings with their underlings, because whilst they can almost undoubtedly handle an upstart Drakite, there's always a risk of underhanded tactics or ganging up being employed. The majority of the witch cults are, understandably, the witches. There are thousands of them, both male and female, within most cults, though the turnover rate is extremely high due to the attrition of the arena/raids and the common practice of dueling to the death in training or in arena conflicts between members. All of them are incredibly agile, more than capable of outmaneuvering almost everyone they face in combat and dodging blows with ease, armed with a wide variety of lethal melee weapons that they can train in the use of. They also use drugs. A lot of drugs. Almost all members and auxiliaries of every witch cult does, to be fair, and though the effects are varied, they universally make the consumer that bit more dangerous, and probably psychotic. The elite of the witches are known as hecatrix, who supposedly all have bitter rivalries between one another. That said, they can put aside their differences on the battlefield, grouping up into a lethal unit known as the Hecatrix Blood Brides, assuming they're not just leading their own squads. Other members of the cults take a step away from the infantry-based arena combat of the majority of their peers, choosing instead to mount up on a Reaver jet bike. How they get it doesn't matter, no questions are ever really asked. The Reavers take part in death races around tracks that are built into the arenas, often using their vehicles as the most dangerous weapon they have and doing anything they can to attain even greater speeds. They apply this logic on the battlefield too, racing ahead of other forces to shred their foes or just, go fast. Another official part of the cults, though somewhat distant from the rest of the membership, are the Beastmasters. They capture and subjugate various creatures, ranging from the flocks of razorwings to hyperviolent Barghezi and Megasaurs, or even supposedly space marines. With the aid of their anti-grav skyboards and their complex masks that emit pheromones and the like, they are able to shepherd their charges into battle or the arena, and their hunts are amongst some of the more popular attractions for the audience. The cults also maintain a tie to another group within Commoragh, the Hellion gangs. Hellions are not cult members per se, despite performing in the arena, as they generally roam the streets and actually hate the Reaver jetbike riders for flaunting their status. The cults typically will trade their time in the arena for both the drugs used by their members as well as a measure of protection from rival gangs. I doubt there'd be a full-fledged alliance between a gang or two and a cult, but if a gang is popular in the arenas, it would be a foolish rival indeed to try and take them out and deny the crowds their fun. Presumably, the Hellions either join the races with the Reavers or race on their own, reflecting their typical activities in the streets when they're not in the arena. They use skyboards just like the Beastmasters, and they use their polearm-like Hellglaze to give them immense maneuverability as well as take out their enemies. Combined, this makes a witch cult and its associates a lightning-fast and utterly lethal close combat force, able to close at a frightening speed and tear its foes apart with alarming efficiency and showmanship. Though they are perhaps less reputed than the cabals who rule the Dark City, there are still many famous witch cults and succubi that we do know about. Undoubtedly the most famous of all is the belladonna of Commoragh herself, Lilith Hesperax, leader of the cult of Strife and perhaps the only member of all witch cults not to use the array of narcotics available to them. Many would probably say that the cult rode upon the metaphorical coattails of Her Excellence Lilith, but despite her being perhaps the greatest living succubus, there are many who serve within the cult who can claim to be in a similar echelon. But if we're being honest, it is Lilith who brought the cult of Strife to its current position. Her shows draw hundreds of thousands every night, and she has won many admirers, including most importantly, Asdrubael Vecht. The cult of Strife and Vecht's Cabal of the Black Heart have maintained one of the strongest alliances ever forged in the Dark City through Hesperax and Vecht's mutual admiration or respect. In fact, when Vecht seized power in Commoragh, he did so with the aid of the cult of Strife. Lilith and her contemporaries may well have taken the heads of several old Archons during the Imperium's raid on the city. The cult is likely one of the busier ones in terms of real space raids, though the belladonna herself only goes to battle rarely and potentially with some political motivation. After all, if Lilith is away from the arenas, then the risk of boredom spikes, and when that happens, the bloodlust needs to be vented somewhere, that being real space, not the streets of Commoragh, just for the record. However, it is possible nowadays that Lilith and co are a bit less present in their arenas, as they changed their alignment somewhat after Commoragh suffered its disjunction before the events known as the Gathering Storm. Lilith defeated, but seemingly didn't kill, the future emissary Yvraine. A priestess of Morai Heg is actually credited with getting the kill. But after her rebirth and the creation of the Ynnari, Hesperax and the Cult of Strife joined up with Yvraine's new faction and have presumably aided that cause ever since. Why they did is unknown. Presumably Lilith was always a secret believer in Iniad, or saw some practical gain from this part switch in allegiance. And we're not quite sure how much this has done for their arena time, but it's an interesting development and adds both political and physical clout to the Inari. Another legendary witch cult is the cult of the Red Grief, who are probably one of the most ambitious mantras and methods of combat I've ever seen. The primary modus operandi of the Red Grief is aerial combat, and so they heavily utilize the various transport skimmers as well as having reavers and hellions. Only their infantry ever touch the ground even for a moment, and on those rare occasions they aren't leaping from bike to tank to skyboard and back again, they will be barely on terra firma for long, just long enough in fact to land a lethal blow. In order to reinforce this method, the main arena of the cult, known as the Pit, has no floor. Instead, the audience and the performers have naught but crystalline galleries and floating platforms, separating them from a lethal fall. If you treat each platform as a vehicle, you sort of see how they get so good at their aerial maneuvers. And if you weren't convinced that the Red Grief weren't a little mad already, they also spend much of their non-raiding, non-performing time fighting in the various gang wars across Commoragh. They see this as meditative, if you can believe that. Next is the cult of the Seventh Woe, potentially led by the succubus Amalika Theskis. This lot haven't done much that we know about, but their beastmasters hold perhaps a unique honour in Commoragh. Somehow, they have been able to capture and imprison, though perhaps not quite tame, tyrannid bioforms of some description. They did this by luring a hive fleet to the imperial hive world Eurydice Secundus by poisoning its atmosphere to enhance its biomass potential. The cult members then swept down and captured a handful in the resultant invasion before leaving the world to its fate, using what are known as runic hex cages. No, I have no idea how they work, go ask an Eldari if you want the details. Also, the Seventh Woe have an interesting relationship with the Harlequins, presumably a particular troop, although I cannot confirm this. Every 17 years, the cult's finest duel with the Harlequins in what is known as the Dance of the Blinding Blade. Though most of the duels are presumably non-lethal, as the goal is to land 13 cuts as opposed to killing, the beasts in the arena that serve as a secondary competition will likely still claim the odd, unaware or distracted competitor. However, there is one duel in this event that does go to the death. A succubus versus the visiting troop master, the main event of the entire dance. As you might expect, given the acrobatic lethality of both harlequins and witches, this is a long and incredible spectacle if your eyes are able to keep pace with it. Quite what the score is between Cult and Harlequin is unknown, but in 990 M41's installment, the victor was the Visitors, whose champion was none other than a great Harlequin, a faction leader as opposed to simply a troop master. This individual was insanely fast, impossibly so apparently. Some claim that it was none other than the Great Harlequin, the laughing god Chegarak, who competed, but this is as yet unsubstantiated, as there's been nothing going on between the Quins and the cult that we know of. Finally, I wish to at least mention the cult of the Pain Eternal, one of the few who probably do not maintain an arena like many other cults. You see, they only dock in Commoragh every few years, making flying visits for the crowds as opposed to maintaining a permanent presence, I assume. The reason? They don't care for the roar of the crowds, or for the taking of mortal lives. No, the Pain Eternal seek instead to, in their own words give or take, drain the lifeblood of the gods themselves. Worshippers of a dark muse named Hecate, the Pain Eternal target their likely constant raids against the places deemed holy by the other races of the galaxy. They and the Adeptus Sororitas have clashed many a time, and it's not exactly clear who wins the majority. Given that many gods are powered directly by the adulation and worship of mortals, namely the Chaos Gods and, if you believe the theory, the Emperor, the logic of the cult is somewhat sound in many ways, but it is not without critics within the Dark City. Some say that the Pain Eternal are just out to prove a point, namely the point that nothing is sacred, as the saying goes. I mean, the Drukhari don't particularly worship gods nowadays since the Dark Muses don't count, so it's not really an unfair point. However, the Pain Eternal Succubi believe in a much higher reward than the crowd's approval, and while I doubt they'll ever kill or even really affect the gods of the galaxy, no one can fault them for ambition or for effort. And there you have it, a look into the various witch cults within the Drukhari. Whilst the Cabals are the powerhouse within the dark city of Commoragh, and the homunculus covens are a necessary evil within its underbelly, it is the witch cults who arguably keep the populace and the city in stable working order. Their performances in the arenas are almost logic-defying and spectacular, with a body count to match, and whilst none can doubt their prowess on the battlefield, one must somehow doubt their sanity for putting themselves at such risk. But then, this is the Drukhari, so I guess that's just par for the course. Now, we must move on, but where to? Actually, I think who to is a little more appropriate. I've made mention of a particular individual in many logs in the past, so I think it's only fair that they get a proper log of their own. For now, thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.